40 years ago, Seve Ballesteros tried to warn the golf world about what was coming. Nobody listened. They called him stubborn. They called him difficult. The PGA Tour banned him for an entire season just to shut him up. He died in 2011, thinking he had lost the fight. But now in 2026, every single thing he had warned about started happening in real time. Billions of dollars, lawyers, cameras. He was right all along. So what exactly did Seve see that the entire sport refused to look at? Stick around. This is the story they spent 40 years pretending not to tell. To understand what Seve was actually fighting for, you have to start with a single number, 15. That was how many PGA Tour events a member was required to play per season to keep his card. Seve was a member of both the PGA Tour and the European Tour, and his commitments stretched further than that. He had business in Japan. He had appearances in Asia and South America and Australia. He was, in his own description, a global player at a time when the phrase did not yet have a meaning. The American Tour required him to choose: show up here 15 times per year, or do not show up at all. In 1985, Seve played 9 events on US soil. That was 6 short. The PGA Tour Policy Board met in October of 1985 and voted to suspend him for the entire 1986 season. The Players' Committee objected. Commissioner Dean Beman moved forward anyway. Seve's argument was simple, and he repeated it often. If I'm free to come over and play anytime I want, maybe I can play 8, maybe I can play 12, maybe I can play 15, 18 or 20. It depends on how I feel when I keep going. If I have to play one specific number, it's different. Read that closely. He was not refusing to play in America. He was refusing to be told how many times. He was arguing for autonomy at a moment when the PGA Tour had built its entire structure around exclusivity. If they change the rule, I'll play 8 to 10 tournaments a year, he said. But 15 is too many. I have to play in Europe and in Japan, and that would make me about 25 altogether. I like to spend some time with my family. More than that would be too many. What makes the story almost unbearable in retrospect is that Seve had been one of the players who lobbied to raise the minimum from 12 to 15 in 1984. He had pushed for the rule that ended up banning him. He had believed at the time that a higher commitment requirement would lift the quality of fields. He had not anticipated that within 18 months, he would be the player it was used against. The rule worked in theory until the moment it was applied to a player whose career did not fit inside one country. Then the contradiction broke through, and the same Seve Ballesteros, who had voted to make the rule stricter, was the one who discovered what it actually cost in practice. The personal context made all of it harder. Seve's father Baldomero, a former champion rower from the fishing village of Pedrena, was dying of lung cancer through the winter of 1985 into the spring of 1986. Seve flew him to Houston for treatment, brought him home to Spain when his condition worsened, and promised him on his deathbed that he would win a third Masters in his honor. Baldomero died on March 4, 1986. The Masters began 5 weeks later. Seve arrived at Augusta having played only 2 competitive rounds since the new year, suspended from the PGA Tour, grieving his father, and carrying the weight of a promise he could not bear to break. He led by 2 shots walking down the 10th fairway on Sunday. He hit a 4-iron into the water on 15. He finished 4th. He later said the shot signaled the end of his aura, that he lost his punch on that swing, and never quite recovered it. Whatever you think of the tour suspension on its merits, it is impossible to separate it from a man trying to win a Masters for his dead father, while banned from playing the tour he had grown up dreaming of conquering. Seve never let go of his anger, but he refused to let it consume his public language. When asked about the suspension that summer at Shinnecock Hills, he answered the question with another one. "Who is Dean Beman?" he said with a grin. When told that Beman planned to play in the Irish Open the following week, Seve smiled. Maybe we will find a special rule for him. The Bisher exchange at the Masters press conference became the most famous moment of the entire feud. Furman Bisher, the legendary Atlanta sports columnist, asked Seve whether he was trying to prove something to the PGA Tour. "Did Dean Beman pay you to ask that question?" Seve responded. Bisher pushed back. "Are you on a crusade?" Seve waved him off. "You talk too sophisticated for me. I don't understand." Bisher landed his punch. "You ought to know what a crusade is. They started in Spain. The line was wrong on its history. The Crusades were proclaimed from Rome, but the message was clear. The American golf establishment had decided that Seve Ballesteros was a foreigner first and a player second. Beman never softened. Decades later in a Golf Digest interview, he was still explaining his position the same way. He wanted to suit himself and play the European Tour off against the US. If you allow a player to be a member and treat him differently, then there's no incentive for anybody to be a member. You ain't got no organization. That was the core of it. Beeman was running an institution. Seve was running a career. The two visions could not be reconciled because they answered different questions. Beeman's question was, how do we hold this together? Seve's question was, why does it need to be held together this tightly? The aftermath proved that the institution had won, and the player had lost. Seve never played more than 8 PGA Tour events in a single season for the remainder of his career. He stayed in Europe. He won 50 European Tour titles, more than any player in the history of that organization. He helped Europe win 5 Ryder Cups across his career. He captained the 1997 European team at Valderrama, the first Ryder Cup ever held in continental Europe. He took everything the PGA Tour had taken from him and built it somewhere else. But the prime years of his career, the late 1980s when he should have been winning American majors and dominating American leaderboards, were spent across the ocean in a quieter version of greatness. 5 major championships in total. He should have had 8. He should have had 10. The slow vindication arrived in pieces. In 1999, the World Golf Championships were created, a series of global events designed to bring together the best players in the world, regardless of their tour affiliation. In 2000, the official World Golf Ranking became the dominant measure of competitive standing, treating European Tour wins, Asian Tour wins, and Japan Tour wins as equally weighted on the merits. The structure Seve had argued for in 1986, a sport that recognized players as global rather than national, became the operating reality of golf, while Seve was still alive to see it. He died of brain cancer in May of 2011, at 54 years old. He did not get a formal apology. He did not get a tour ceremony. He simply got the quiet satisfaction of watching the sport bend toward the shape he had insisted it should have all along. And then there was 2022. When Greg Norman launched LIV Golf with Saudi backing and signed players away from the PGA Tour, the argument that exploded across the sport was not new. It was Seve's argument, dragged out of the 1980s and dressed in modern clothing. Should players be free to compete wherever the highest level of golf is being offered? Does any one tour have the right to dictate where its members spend their time? Is golf a global sport or an American product with international participants? Every word of the LIV versus PGA Tour debate had been spoken before, in lower volume and worse English, by a Spaniard who had no Saudi money behind him and no media machine to amplify his case. He was not arguing for breakaway leagues or $100 million guaranteed contracts. He was arguing for something much smaller and much more important: the right of a great player to choose where he played without losing his eligibility. He paid for that argument with a year of his career, with the prime years of his American competitive life, with a Masters he would never win for his father. He died believing it was a battle he had lost. He had not. The battle was simply waiting 40 years to be fought out loud, with billions of dollars and lawyers and cameras on it, instead of one tired Spaniard in a press tent at Augusta. The golf world will never give Seve the credit for being right early. It does not work that way. Greatness gets remembered. Foresight rarely does. But every time a player today flies between Dubai and Augusta and Tokyo without losing his card, every time a European wins a major and the official World Golf Ranking moves the way it is supposed to move, every time the sport behaves like the global game it has finally become, it is a small posthumous letter being addressed to a man who told them this would happen and was suspended for saying so out loud. If this one landed for you, drop a like before you scroll away. It is the single biggest thing that tells YouTube to push these stories out to other people who care about the long history of the sport. Subscribe if you want more of these, the kind that take the long view instead of the loud one. There are more coming.